Have you ever noticed that every beautiful, absolutely beautiful woman is rarely with an average man? It's no coincidence, it's no fluke, and it's definitely not love at first sight. What's behind this isn't romance, it's social engineering disguised as desire. There's a brutal and uncomfortable truth. In the modern world, female beauty has become as much a status code as male success. But what few have the courage to admit is that, in this silent and cruel game, the successful man doesn't choose the beautiful woman. He's conditioned to believe he needs her. Not for pleasure, but for validation. And this conditioning, which begins in childhood and crystallizes in adulthood, is what forms one of the greatest social prisons of contemporary masculinity. And that's why I reiterate, successful men only date beautiful women. From an early age, we learn to associate a man's worth with what he can achieve, control, or display. It's not just about being successful, it's about showing that you are successful. And in a world where symbols speak louder than words, few things say as much as the woman by your side. She is the medal, the trophy, the seal of social approval. The French philosopher Jean Baudrillard already spoke about this in his theory of simulacra. We live in a society that no longer seeks truth, but rather the most convincing representation of it. Men don't want to be powerful. They want to appear powerful. And being with a beautiful woman has become part of this theater of power where the stage is everyday life and the audience is social judgment. But this game has a cost. Because when a man's worth is measured by the beauty of the woman by his side, he becomes hostage to the external gaze. He no longer chooses with his heart, nor with his mind. He chooses with fear. The fear of appearing less than he is, of not being admired, of not fulfilling his role. This turns seduction into a performance and desire into currency. And the deeper he sinks into this role, the further away he becomes from real connection. The beautiful woman ceases to be someone to be known and becomes a symbol to be displayed. And if all this seems exaggerated, look around. Pop culture is replete with examples. CEOs with models, rappers with actresses, soccer players with magazine cover influencers. It's always the same script. He rises, she appears. But what no one shows is what's behind the scenes. What happens when a man realizes that what should be the pinnacle of his success fulfills absolutely nothing? The answer is uncomfortable. He falls silent. Because admitting that the woman of his dreams has become an emotional nightmare would be admitting that the dream was an illusion. Nietzsche wrote that what is done for love is always beyond good and evil. But is what drives these relationships truly love? Or is it the desire disguised as social conquest? What we see are men who, in search of meaning, end up buying into an archetype that doesn't offer a soul, only appearance. And women who, on the other hand, learn to mold their appearance as an asset for social survival. Neither side wins. Both play roles, living an elegant and empty dance in which neither truly touches the other. This is where our dive begins. Because the phrase, "successful men only date beautiful women," isn't just any observation, it's a sentence that defines behaviors, shapes decisions, and ruins freedoms. But what really lies behind it? And more importantly, who's truly in control? The successful man or the image he feels he must uphold? Now, dissolve your certainties, take a deep breath, and stay with me, because what comes next will deconstruct everything you thought you understood about success, beauty, and desire. It all starts with a well-told lie. If you're successful enough, the woman of your dreams will be inevitable. This narrative has infiltrated the subtext of culture in films, songs, perfume advertisements, and men's lifestyle videos. The successful man is always portrayed with a beautiful woman by his side, as if financial power were directly connected to feminine aesthetics. And by seeing this story repeated so often, men begin to pursue it as a biological truth, as an automatic reflex. But this isn't a truth. It's an illusion with ancient roots, much deeper than the superficial eye can grasp. Darwin's evolutionary theory, often cited superficially to justify choice patterns, suggests that women seek partners with resources because in the past, this guaranteed protection and survival. Men, driven by reproductive criteria, were attracted to signs of fertility, such as youth and facial symmetry. This crude and primitive logic is still used today to explain the pairing of powerful men with attractive women. But the modern world is no longer the African savanna. And yet, we continue to operate within instinctive systems that have been hijacked by marketing, media, and capital. What we see is not natural selection in action. What we see is cultural selection distorting our desires. A man's status has become a commodity, and a woman's beauty a product. Both are sold, packaged and offered in digital storefronts. She molds her body to fit the masculine ideal of desire. He molds his assets to fit the feminine ideal of security and social projection. It's not seduction, it's negotiation. And worse, it's a silent negotiation where neither admits they're selling anything. The emotional pornography of the perfect life also fuels this cycle. Instagram has become a stage where men flaunt watches, cars, and women flaunt curves, travel, and men. Everything is carefully filtered, lit, and scripted. The CEO with the blonde and the red dress on the yacht, the singer with the international model in the dressing room, the fitness influencer with millions of followers on a trip to the Maldives. But when the camera turns off, emptiness remains. The question no one wants to answer remains: what do these people really feel for each other, besides pride in being seen together? This is the great contradiction. The successful man believes he's in control because he can choose any woman he wants. But in reality, he's being manipulated by an invisible algorithm of social validation. He doesn't choose. He follows a script already written by others. He pursues the beautiful woman not because he deeply desires her, but because he's learned that she is the ultimate symbol of his ascension. It's the final point of the "I've made it in life" narrative. And if she's not beside him in the photo, the victory feels incomplete. Robert Greene, in The Art of Seduction, reveals that true seduction lies not in what's visibly offered, but in what's awakened internally. The problem is that beauty, however powerful as a visual trigger, is limited as an emotional tool. She may attract the eye, but she rarely captures the soul. And the man who places his desire exclusively on appearance ends up creating a fragile relational model, based on something that, by nature, is fleeting: aesthetics. But if this is so obvious, why do so many men still fall into this trap? Because there's something deeper at play: the fear of not being recognized. Modern man has been trained to measure his worth by what he conquers. And if conquering a beautiful woman is the symbolic pinnacle of masculinity, then he will pursue it with all his might, even if, deep down, he knows it doesn't fulfill him. Kierkegaard's philosophy helps us understand this void. He said that man lives in a constant existential anguish between the desire for freedom and the burden of choice. And when man chooses to fit into the social ideal instead of following his authentic desire, he abdicates freedom in exchange for superficial approval. He doesn't live, he acts. And this theater has consequences. How many men do you know who are financially successful, but live in emotionally shallow, sexually boring, and psychologically draining relationships? How many successful friends have you seen trapped in cycles of betrayal, manipulation, and constant insecurity? They bought the full success package, but didn't receive the peace they expected, because they were playing the wrong game, with rules they didn't write and prizes not worth the effort. Data from the American Psychological Association shows that men with high levels of financial success have proportionally higher rates of anxiety in romantic relationships than men with average incomes. This is because financial success raises expectations, and with them, the internal and external pressure to maintain a standard. This standard includes the beautiful woman at his side, not for pleasure, but for consistency with the image. And maintaining an image requires energy. A lot of energy, especially when it has no real emotional basis. Ultimately, the beautiful woman who enters a successful man's life often becomes a continuation of what he projects, and not what he needs. She reinforces his public persona but rarely connects with his private essence. And this creates an internal fracture. The man lives two lives, the one he displays and the one he feels. And when these two versions become too distant, he collapses. In one of the most emblematic cases, a Silicon Valley tech entrepreneur, billionaire, influential, respected, confessed in an anonymous interview that despite dating an international model, he had never felt so lonely. He described the relationship as an implicit status contract, where both knew what they represented, but lacked real intimacy. "It's like having a marble statue in the room," he said, "beautiful, impeccable, but cold." This is the paradox of male power. It attracts, but also repels. The higher the pedestal, the harder it is to know who approaches you because of you or what you represent. And if the beauty of the woman at your side is part of the package, it also becomes part of the doubt. Does she love me, or does she love what I can provide? And this is where modern seduction collapses, the moment desire turns to distrust, and conquest becomes obligation. Freud already warned that desire is not linear. It is contradictory, ambivalent, unstable. What attracts us also threatens us. What we seek also scares us. And the man who is attracted exclusively to beauty begins to fear losing it, because he knows that somewhere in the world there is another man richer, more famous, more powerful, ready to offer a higher platform. And if the woman at his side was attracted by this, the bond is fragile. So what remains? There remains fatigue. There remains doubt. There remains the feeling of being surrounded, admired, and empty. Because success that requires a visual standard to be validated is not success. It is slavery. It is the constant need to prove, to show off, to renew. And this renewal has an emotional cost that many cannot bear for long. But there is a way out. A silent, rare, and powerful alternative that few know about, and that will be explored later. For now, it is essential to understand. The path that seems right, money, status, and appearance, is in fact a carefully constructed trap, and those who fall into it rarely emerge unscathed. Because the price of purchased beauty is not financial. It is emotional, psychological, and often existential. And it's precisely this hidden cost that brings us to the next point on this journey. Because the problem isn't beauty. The problem is what it demands in return. What no one tells you is that extreme beauty doesn't come alone. It carries with it an invisible contract, sealed in silence, but with cruel clauses. It's a psychological contract, which the man pays with energy, attention, vigilance, and self-control, and often doesn't even realize it. When a successful man enters a relationship with a stunning woman, he's rarely aware of what he's actually buying. He thinks he's acquiring pleasure, status, and companionship, but in many cases, he's actually acquiring tension, insecurity, and a constant theater of power playing. Beauty exacts interest, and that interest accumulates quickly. It starts with the looks. Every time she enters a room, eyes turn. The man feels it. Initially, he feels proud. It's confirmation that he's won. But over time, that pride begins to transform into silent vigilance. He begins to observe who observes her. He analyzes the glances, the smiles, the comments. And then the question arises, does she enjoy the attention? Does she enjoy teasing? Is she playing the game with him or against him? From then on, a corrosive process sets in. The man begins to operate not from trust, but from restraint. Not from the freedom to be, but from the need to control. He begins to shape his speech, adjust his behavior, recalibrate his presence, all to maintain the illusion that he is still enough for her. Because deep down he knows, if she came for status, she can leave for greater status. If she was attracted by image, all it takes is for a more brilliant image to emerge. And this game of relative value destroys any chance of genuine connection. Psychology calls this relational cognitive dissonance. The constant feeling that something is out of alignment, that the relationship requires a continuous performance. It's as if he were on a stage, acting, while trying to convince himself that this is love. But real love doesn't require acting, it requires surrender. And you can't surrender when you're afraid of being replaced. There is also a second type of cost, the cost of vanity. Many extremely beautiful women have developed, over the years, an inflated sense of emotional importance. This isn't judgment, it's empirical observation. From an early age, these women were socially rewarded for their appearance. They received disproportionate attention, constant validation, and opportunities simply for being there. Beautiful. This shapes their sense of self, and often, without realizing it, they come to believe they deserve more than they offer. Not because they're bad, but because they've been trained to see themselves as a prize. And the problem is that a prize, to remain valued, needs to remain unattainable. So she plays with scarcity, distance, and light emotional manipulation. She flirts with doubt, tests limits, and creates deliberate tension. And the man, even a successful one, ends up dancing around her like a star spinning around an emotional gravity he can't control. This pattern is more common than one might think. In the offices of high-net-worth couples therapists, it's common to hear stories of emotionally exhausted business people trying to maintain a relationship that has effectively become a job. They report silent crises, sleepless nights, constant anxiety, loss of libido, and not from a lack of desire, but from excessive demands. Because when a relationship is based on appearance and status, any slip-up can be fatal. Gaining 3 kilos, losing a professional opportunity, failing to flaunt something, everything becomes a risk. This is where an uncomfortable question arises. Who holds the power after all? The man with money or the woman with beauty? The answer is neither, because both are hostage to social expectations. He needs to maintain the standard. She needs to maintain her appearance. Both live imprisoned in images and slowly die in silence without ever truly knowing each other. Michel Foucault, in his theory of power and surveillance, said that true control is not imposed from the outside, it is internalized. The prisoner who watches himself is the most efficient of captives. And that's exactly what happens in this type of relationship. The successful man watches his performance, his language, his presence. The beautiful woman watches her figure, her youth, her appeal. Both become guards and prisoners at the same time. And if you think this is an exaggeration, observe high-profile couples at public events. See how she smiles for the camera with pinpoint precision. See how he guides her with his hand on her back as if guiding an expensive piece of art. See how happy they both look. And now ask yourself, when was the last time you saw true passion there? Not posing, not choreography. Real passion. Philosopher Byung-Chul Han points out in his work, The Burnout Society, that we live in a time where the pressure to perform has replaced the external pressure of authoritarianism. We're no longer obligated by anyone, but we are compelled to constantly perform. In love, this is devastating, because true love demands vulnerability, imperfection, and failure. But a man with an extremely beautiful woman often doesn't allow himself to make mistakes, and this kills spontaneity, connection, and pleasure. Another hidden layer is the cycle of comparison. In a hypervisual world like ours, where more and more beautiful women appear on social media every day, the aesthetic pressure never ends. The successful man finds himself forced to compete with himself, every year, at every event, with every new woman who enters his radar. He begins to measure his current partner's beauty against the new thing of the moment, and she, in turn, senses this, knows it, and begins to play along. It's a vicious cycle where neither fully trusts the other because both know they're in a silent social auction. Even worse, many men don't even realize they're being emotionally drained. They think it's normal to feel anxious, suspicious, and tense. They attribute it to work, stress, and routine. But the true thief of peace is there. In bed, at the dinner table, on the cell phone screen. It's in the relationship that became a transaction, in the love that became a currency, in the woman who became a status symbol. And what does all this ultimately cause? A progressive emptying of the male soul. The man distances himself. He stops listening to his intuition, his body, his true desire. He becomes a maintainer, not a lover, a relationship manager, not an intimate partner. And this disconnection exacts a price, not visible, but profound. Studies from Harvard Medical School show that men who report high levels of social performance in their relationships also have a higher incidence of disorders related to self-image and chronic stress. This reveals something no one wants to admit. Relationship success based on aesthetics exacts a very high mental toll. And in this scenario, women suffer too. Because at some point, they realize they are loved not for who they are, but for what they represent. And as age advances, as the body changes, as youth begins to fade, fear sets in. She realizes that what held her there can be replaced, and desperation takes the place of vanity. Many become aggressive, jealous, manipulative, not out of malice, but out of existential panic. Because just as he fears he's no longer enough for her, she fears she's no longer desirable to him. It's a game of broken mirrors. Both project and consume images of each other, but never truly see each other. And when the mirror cracks, what remains is the reflection of a profound loneliness, camouflaged in expensive dinners, exotic trips, and social media likes. That's why it's so important to understand what this chapter reveals. Extreme beauty, when it becomes the primary criterion for choice, becomes a silent poison. A poison that disguises itself as luxury, but silently corrodes the soul. A poison that transforms successful men into guardians of empty castles, and beautiful women into prisoners of an unstable throne. But there is a way out. There is another path. A type of relationship that doesn't require constant maintenance or emotional vigilance. A type of desire that arises from the invisible, the magnetic, the authentic. And those who follow this path understand a profound truth. Power isn't in appearance, it's in presence. And it's about this type of power that we're going to talk about now. Because, contrary to what most people think, the most desired man isn't the most handsome or the richest. He's the most magnetic. And this magnetism can't be bought. While many chase dollar signs and curves, there is a silent minority that attracts everything without needing to chase anything. These are men who don't flaunt, don't beg, and don't sell themselves. Men who don't need to prove their worth because their mere presence communicates it. They don't buy beauty, they provoke it. They don't compete for attention, they absorb presence. They are rich not just in wealth, but in magnetism. And what sets them apart is not what they possess, but what they project. This is where true masculine power is born, not in control, but in invisible influence. Not in shouting, but in the silence that seduces. Real attraction begins where the desire for approval ends. It arises the moment a man stops seeking to fulfill external expectations and begins to fully inhabit his essence. This essence is not manufactured. It is not scripted. It is felt. And when a man lives from this frequency, confident, calm, authentic, he activates a kind of energy that cannot be imitated by any car, suit, or bank account. This energy is called presence. And presence is the most underrated asset of modern seduction. Presence is when you walk into a room and don't need to say a word to be noticed. It's when your posture communicates confidence, your voice soothes effortlessly, your gaze penetrates without invading. It's the opposite of tentativeness. It's the opposite of look at me. True presence says, I don't need you, but you will notice me. And why does this work? Because a truly selective woman doesn't seek a provider. She seeks a center. A man who doesn't sway according to her emotional climate, who doesn't lose his composure in the face of crises or challenges, who doesn't pursue her but doesn't run away either, who observes without judgment, speaks little but precisely. A man who is already whole and therefore doesn't need her validation to feel sufficient. Carl Jung said that a man who doesn't confront his shadow is doomed to project it onto the world. And many men project their insecurities onto the figure of a beautiful woman. They pursue her, not because they truly desire her, but because they believe she will fill the hole they themselves refuse to look at. True masters of seduction, however, don't run from the shadow, they embrace it, and in doing so, they become whole, full, seductive through completeness, not through neediness. There's a silent, almost invisible practice these men master: strategic listening. They listen more than they speak, but they don't listen to respond. They listen to understand. And in this process, they effortlessly create an emotional connection. Because every woman, even the coldest, the vainest, the most performative, deep down desires to be understood. And to be understood by a man who doesn't try to control or flatter her, but simply sees her, is a seductive and rare experience. These men also master another secret: scarcity. They don't give themselves away easily. They don't overexpose themselves. They don't need to be constantly available. Their attention is a prize, not a commodity. And so when they look, touch, or say something, every gesture carries weight. They don't need to compete with other men, because they don't play the same game. And a woman, realizing this, breaks out of her automatic script and begins to ask herself, who is this guy? And that's where seduction begins. But perhaps the most powerful trait of these men is their clarity. They know what they want and what they don't want. They know what they tolerate and what they reject. They know where they are and where they're going. They don't test. They don't send mixed signals. They don't spiral into emotional cycles. And this clarity is deeply erotic, because in a world of lost men, a man who knows who he is and what he wants becomes an irresistible rarity. Therefore, the magnetic man doesn't need to be handsome, nor rich, nor famous. He needs to be whole. He needs to be centered. He needs to stop conforming to what the world expects and start shaping the world around him with his presence. And this is something you don't learn from viral videos or from relationship gurus' reels. You learn by living, by silencing external noise, by observing your own emotions, by having the courage to be alone without feeling empty, by having the discipline to say no, even when yes seems easier, by having a standard, but not an aesthetic standard, a standard of awareness. Because the right woman won't be attracted to you by your car, your shape, or your travels. She'll be attracted to your energy, by your depth, by your calm unpredictability, and above all, by your comfortable silence. The silence of a man who doesn't need to impress, just be. Therefore, the new masculine power isn't in possessing, it's in provoking. It's not in showing off, it's in making yourself scarce. It's not in conquering, it's in revealing. Little by little, with intelligence, with tact, with elegant audacity. This is the new seducer archetype, the man who can't be bought and is therefore desired.